his father, Robert S. Walsh, and his involvement in World War II. So, to start off, how exactly did my grandfather get involved in World War II?
Well, Robert Walsh was didn't have to actually go into the war originally because he was a chemist in a steel plant in St. Louis, Missouri, and as such, he was part of the home front and had a deferment because they were making steel for planes and tanks and things. So he didn't have to go. But being a young man, he was interested. He wanted to get into the fight, wanted the adventure. So, in spite of opposition by his friends and his family, even his fiancée, he joined the Army anyway. Actually, he joined the Army Air Corps to be a pilot.
Who exactly did he join up with, or what squadron did he join up with?
Yeah, he joined the Army Air Corps with the 339th Fighter Group, and he had originally always dreamed of being a pilot, but his eyesight wasn't good enough to be a pilot. So they brought him in as an armaments officer in that group, and he trained as an armaments officer all the way until he was sent over to England.
Well, what exactly did he do as an armament officer?
Well, an armaments officer is responsible for making sure that all the planes are all armed. So he would make sure that the machine guns were working properly and they had a full complement of bullets. He made sure that the cannons on the fighters were working and had all the ammunition they needed. On bombers, they would be assigned to make sure that the bombs got into the bomb bays, and that just before they would fly, that these bombs were fused. They've got a little fuse in the front of them, and if the fuse isn't armed, the bomb won't go off, even if you drop it from several thousand feet up in the air. So they arm the bombs to go off. Although fighters don't have bombs.
And where exactly was he stationed during the war?
Well, he trained, as I said, as an armaments officer before he went over to the war itself. Then they shipped him out to England, and he was going to join this 339th Fighter Group. But when he got there, the 339th did have an armaments officer already. But the 352nd Fighter Group needed an intelligence officer. So they reassigned him, right around D-Day, June of 1944. They reassigned him as an intelligence officer. They gave him some training, and then he started serving in the 352nd as an intelligence officer.
And what exactly did he do as an intelligence officer?
Well, the intelligence officer was in charge of two different tasks. And the first task is to brief pilots when they're going on a fighter or a bombing run. You remember the old movies, 12 O'Clock High, and even the Star Wars movie where they would brief pilots. He did that. And then the second task that they did was to debrief the pilots once they got back home from a mission.
Well, what exactly did he do within these briefings and debriefings? What went on, and how exactly did he prepare for these?
Well, an intelligence officer, the briefing, you see the briefing in old movies, as I mentioned. Well, what happens is a briefing episode, or a briefing, or preparing for a briefing, the intelligence officer, to prepare for a brief, it starts, I think, the night before. The commanding general of the whole group, or of the whole army, will order a mission, to Dresden or to Berlin or something like that. And the intelligence officer spends pretty much all night. They look up weather reports, and they look up intelligence about where there are anti-aircraft batteries in the ground that they're going to cover, to get to the target. They know more or less where enemy fighter units are, and if they're going to encounter these fighter squadrons, where they can expect to find them. Then they also look at the map, and they make sure that the pilots know how to get to the target, so they point out landmarks and things. And they do this all night. Actually, I was told they would get the cooks up, for the army, to get them ready to start cooking for the whole army.
Oh, wow.
And then they would hand all of this intelligence to the commander of the squadron, who would give the pilots the brief, or, brief the pilots on the mission. Meanwhile, the intelligence officers, they'd go to sleep. They were up all night. They'd go to sleep.
Yeah.
They'd sleep as the pilots were getting ready for their brief. Then, at the end of the mission, usually it would take most of the day. They'd be coming in the afternoon, and now another phase of the intelligence officer's life began, where each pilot would be assigned to a single intelligence agent or intelligence officer. And the intelligence officer essentially would walk the pilot through the entire mission. He would have him talk about it from the time they lifted off from the airfield to the time they touched down at the end of the mission. So they would tell the intelligence officer what kind of weather they encountered, what kind of anti-aircraft guns they encountered, what the different towns looked like from the previous mission, what kinds of enemy fire did they get, what kind of enemy squadrons attacked them, and did they kill anybody, and things like that, and all the way to the mission. And then when they got to the mission, how did the mission go? Did they knock out the target? Did they bomb it successfully? Did they all get back? Then they ask about how they dealt with the enemy fighters, and did they kill anybody? Did they shoot anybody down? And once they've got all this information, then they kind of cross-check it with other sources. So, for instance, they will double-check it with the other pilots in the squadron, but they'll also check it with the cameras. Every one of these fighters had a camera in the nose, and they would make sure that the camera's photographs kind of jibed with the story of the pilot. And then the intelligence officers would decide. They were the ones who actually decided whether a particular pilot was an ace or not. I think they had to have 5 confirmed kills to be an ace. It might have been more. I don't think it was less than that, but it was somewhere around there. And so then they would authorize, okay, this man should be an ace.
Wow, the intelligence officers are pretty important. Did your father meet any important people, or did he answer those? Like, who exactly did he answer for? Who did he kind of talk about?
Well, actually, he was he knew some fairly famous people. The commander of his fighter group was the leading ace of the war up to that time. I think he had 12 or 15 confirmed, kills. And he also met General Jimmy Doolittle. Now, you might remember Jimmy Doolittle. He led Doolittle's raid. Doolittle's raid was a bombing run that the Army Air Corps launched over Tokyo only a couple of months after Pearl Harbor, the Japanese and most everybody else thought that America couldn't mount a raid over Japan
Yeah.
so quickly. They thought that they had destroyed the fleet and they'd be out of commission for months, maybe even years. But no, I mean, only about a month or two after Pearl Harbor, Jimmy Doolittle led this raid and bombed downtown Tokyo. They were completely surprised by that. So my father did meet him and met, you know, other famous people, although those are the only two people that I remember him mentioning.
Well, how exactly did you come across this information? Did your father tell you all about this, or was there other sources that you were just curious about it and you felt like researching it, or what?
Actually, my father was pretty mum about it. He really didn't talk much about it at all. We heard we heard small pieces about it. You know, I'm one of 7 children. He worked at Kodak in Rochester, New York, and you know, studying the photographs certainly helped him. You know, when he became an engineer for Kodak.
Yeah.
But I mean, if we talked about the war, he really didn't talk about it much. He didn't say much. We heard little bits and pieces of the story, but we really didn't hear much of any of this. It was only in October of 2004, he went to the 339th Fighter Group reunion in Savannah, Georgia. Again, October 2004.
Yeah.
When he went there, you know, this whole story came out. You know, he was talking with all of his friends, all of the, you know, his messmates and things, and talking about the story, and they would come to him and talk to him, you know, about how, you know, this briefing or that briefing helped them out, and you know, how they remember it and things. So I mean, that's how our family found out about it. It was only less than a year ago. I'm very proud of him and you know, what he did in the war, and it was a real. I'm very grateful that we finally were able to, you know, get the whole story out of what he had done in the war.
Yeah. Well, that I found that very informative. Thank you very much for informing me and informing our viewers. Thank you for your time and.